of Ohio and served in the private sector. He can tell you a little bit more about his background in just a moment. But there's an opportunity for us to really get to hear him, and he's not going to be on stage with 13, 14 other people. You're going to get to hear up close and personal his views on various issues. Now, I've done a couple of these things already, and people always say, you need to touch on this issue or that issue. There are so many issues out there. We can't talk about all of them. But I do want to talk about the issues that I, as Attorney General, have had to deal with. Those are the issues involving the role of federal government as it relates to states and state sovereignty and individual liberty. So in just a few seconds, I'm going to hand it off and let Governor Kasich make an opening remark. But I want to thank all of you for being here today. You could be anywhere else, and you chose to be here for lunch today, for a lunch and learn. And I want to thank all of you for taking time. You're going to get to hear Governor Kasich talk about his views, his vision for America and our country and the direction we need to go. Then you're going to take that information, you're going to be armed, you're going to use that, and you're going to go make an informed decision in a couple of weeks. And more importantly, you're going to probably influence other decision makers, other voters here. So Governor Kasich, you've got some force multipliers out here today that are going to be spreading your message. So I hope, and I know that you'll take full advantage of this opportunity. So ladies and gentlemen, it's at this time that I would like to go ahead and formally introduce Governor John Kasich. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Well, one thing I have to tell you is I was looking forward to coming down here this week, as I expected it was going to be extremely cold in Ohio. And it's warmer in Ohio today than it is in South Carolina. This has been the crazy, I do want to hear about politics and all that, but it's been the craziest fall. You know that this week is projected, every day is supposed to be in the 50s, and then this weekend it's supposed to be 60 degrees in Ohio. Is that unbelievable? What's the temperature going to be here? 70. Okay, 70. All right, well, you got to be beat by a little bit. Anyway, it's nice to be here with the Attorney General. He's a good guy, smart guy, know his daddy. And rather than getting into a big diatribe now, we'll just start asking questions, and maybe, I don't know, General, if it's all right with you, but maybe at some point we can have a couple of them jump up and bellow out of the crowd if they have something they haven't heard.
I'm going to do best to keep this within an hour, so we'll go as quickly as we possibly can, and any balance of the time you want to give to the audience, we'll certainly do that.
We just want to make sure they don't leave here saying, well, why didn't they ask this? Now, if it's really hard questions, please don't ask.
I have to do one thing, one more housekeeping thing before we jump into it. Before I do that, I wanted to say this. This table's very wobbly, Governor, and you've got a hot cup of coffee.
It's fine, I can control it.
So, so y'all might actually see some hot coffee spilled on the Governor later during the hour. But we're going to try to be very conversational. This isn't going to be like a debate. This is going to be very conversational, like we're sitting in a restaurant talking about issues, and you all are all sitting in the booth with us. That's what we're going for. Now, first, I want to go ahead and thank some folks before we jump into the questions with the Governor. I should have done this before he started talking, but first, this is the second time we've done this. I've got to thank the Grand Strand Business Alliance and the Myrtle Beach Chamber of Commerce, Area Chamber of Commerce, for so much. Keena's, I see you in the back. Brad Dean, who's not here today, has been such an instrumental part, and their staffs. What an amazing group of people who represent the business community here so well. So at least give them a round of applause real quick. Jim Creel and the Crown Reef Resort and Conference Center staff, all the folks that helped put this together. What a wonderful venue for us. I want to go ahead and thank them. And we have a lot of important people here today. You're all important in my opinion, but I do want to identify some of the electeds that traveled to be with us today. We have Councilman Bob Childs is with us, Councilman Cam Crawford, Horry County School Board Chairman Joe DeFeo, Chairman Randy Hollister, Georgetown GOP. We have Chairman Robert Raven with the Horry County GOP. Councilman Gary Lotus from Horry County. We have Senator Ray Clary sitting up here in the front. Representative Greg Duckworth. Representative Russell Fry. We have Representative Heather Ammons Crawford. I already mentioned Brad Dean earlier in the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber and the Grand Strand Business Alliance, but there's one other person I want to give a quick shout out to, and we have a Conservative Leadership Project intern today who, it is her 20th birthday, and she's here volunteering. Where is Sarah Abbott? Sarah Abbott, there she is, she's behind the camera, ladies and gentlemen. Happy birthday, Sarah.
Thank you.
We would sing happy birthday, but we don't want to eat into the time of the governor. So we're going to go ahead and listen. If I omitted your name, I'm sure someone will pass me a note in a minute. We'll identify you at the back end, but we're going to go ahead and jump into the whole reason that we're here. Okay, Governor, you heard in my initial kickoff that the next president is going to have a profound impact on the Supreme Court. As a governor, you've had the opportunity to appoint a lot of judges in your home state. So the first question I would like to ask, go ahead and tell the audience here a little bit about your judicial philosophy. I know that we don't believe in litmus tests, but what things are you looking for in a judicial candidate for the Supreme Court or one of the lower courts?
Well, I've appointed well over 100 judges and also one member of the Ohio Supreme Court. All of our judges are elected. Sometimes they're appointed if there's a vacancy. It happens that the person that I appointed to the Ohio Supreme Court happens to be a woman, which I'm thrilled that we came to that conclusion. I basically set up a committee and I charged them with picking somebody who, is basically conservative. And what do I mean by that? Their job is to interpret the law as it is, not to make the law. We don't want to have judges making laws. That's not their job. That's the legislative branch. And so I look for character, I look for record, I look for intelligence, and it's worked out pretty well. General, we've had good success, and a number of people that we have appointed have been elected. That doesn't mean necessarily that that makes them a good judge, but if they're screwing things up and not representing the philosophy that I felt they were going to, they probably wouldn't win. So we have a good success rate, and the lady that serves on the Ohio Supreme Court is doing a fantastic job. So I want judges to basically, you look at their record, you see who they are, and maybe not everybody has to be a judge. I mean, you might have somebody that comes from, a law school or something who, could serve well, but you want somebody that's going to have common sense, good values, and not try to make law.
Another question I always ask folks, and this is important to me, that I view there's two kinds of judges, and there's one kind that views the U.S. Constitution or state constitution with its original intent, the original intent of the people who drafted it. In other words, whatever year they wrote that Constitution, and they intended that Constitution to mean X, Y, and Z, and if the times require the Constitution to change, then it should be ratified through a process outlined in the Constitution. Then there are others who view the Constitution as a living document, meaning that it evolves with the times, and it might have been written to mean this 100 years ago, but times require us to interpret it differently, and so they view it as a living document that changes with the times. What are your views on that, and what would you expect your judges' views to be on that?
I don't think that the Constitution ought to evolve with the times. It is what it is, and if you want to change it, then you have an amendment process. For example, I'm trying to pass an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to require a federal balanced budget. I don't think the judges ought to mandate it. It ought to be passed. So, no, I think we have too many things in our society that are changing all the time. There got to be a few compasses, don't you all think? There ought to be a couple compasses that we have in the world, and one of them ought to be the Constitution of the United States of America. So that's pretty simple for me.
What Supreme Court, and I don't want to say recent Supreme Court decisions, but they can be recent. They can be from 70 years ago, whatever. What Supreme Court decisions do you disagree with the most, and why?
Well, there's some people that think the court's going to make some kind of a ruling on gun control. You know that? And I didn't agree with the court decision on the individual mandate. I just think they obscured what the language said, and those are a couple that I disagree with. And I think whenever you have a court, you're going to find disagreements, but you, by and large, want to have a court that's going to, interpret the laws as written. I think the individual mandate, was defined ultimately as some sort of a tax or something. So I don't happen to agree with that.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next area, which is executive action, or as I like to refer to it as the phone and pen section. Y'all all heard the president say that he has a phone and he has a pen and he's going to use it. I'll give you two brief examples that I've dealt with as Attorney General. When I first came into office, one of the first issues we dealt with was the Yucca Mountain issue. As many of you know, that over 30 years, numerous bipartisan Congresses have designated Yucca Mountain, which is out in Nevada, as the nuclear repository for the state's nuclear waste. Billions of dollars were spent doing environmental impact studies. Billions of dollars were spent studying the potential impacts this could have. Cost-benefit analysis was done. They even constructed a 6-mile-long road through the middle of the mountain to help facilitate storing of the waste. South Carolina, I don't know if you knew this, is the 3rd highest ratepayer into the nuclear waste fund. So anytime you pay your utility bill, a fee is tacked on top of that and was collected by the utility companies and then collected by the federal government to pay for all of that work at Yucca Mountain. I think South Carolina's paid several $1 billion in 30 years. Unilaterally, the Secretary of Energy unilaterally took that off the table without any input from Congress. So it was just unilaterally done. They said, keep your nuclear waste, we'll keep the money. That's basically
got a lot of input from Congress, from the guy who's the senator from Nevada.
Well, and absolutely, but from a process standpoint, it was a decision that was unilaterally executed. But yes, the majority leader at the time was from Nevada. That is not lost on us. Another issue, and I'm going to go ahead and pitch you the question. In November of last year, the president stated that I just took action to change the law in reference to the immigration law. A phrase that the White House later clarified as the president speaking colloquially. This was in reference to his executive order on immigration, which would allow 5 million illegal immigrants to remain in the U.S., and he based it on the executive branch's ability to have prosecutorial discretion. Do you believe federal administrative agencies are required to operate based on congressional or executive action when the two are in conflict?
Well, look, I mean, I'm suing the Obama administration right now on their EPA rules.
Me too.
I mean, we have something going on. And, the reason is that it's a thing I don't quite understand. Now, I used to be a congressman, and I don't think we've ever seen this kind of activity. I can't remember any. I don't think, General, that the bureaucrats shouldn't be making laws either. And this is something that I don't quite understand. I have an economic proposal to balance the federal budget to cut taxes, and I've done this before. I was chairman of the Budget Committee in Washington. We created jobs. That's the whole purpose for it. The economy was growing. The same thing in Ohio. We were way in the hole, and now we're doing terrific, with still ways to go. But the thing I've never understood is why we let bureaucrats do what they do. So in regard to that, I would freeze all federal regulations for at least a year, and I would force the Congress to vote on these things. If it's more than $100 million, there ought to be a congressional vote. And then we need to go back and look at the regulations we have, because these are the things that are killing small business. Big companies can absorb a lot of these regulations, but small people can't do it. In my state, and look, when I talk about Ohio, I'm really talking about America. We're just nothing more than a snapshot of the entire country. I mean, we have everything in Ohio. When I travel the country, I find Ohio everywhere, and when I'm in Ohio, I find America everywhere. That's why the elections are always so close, because it's so competitive and a snapshot of who we are. I have created a mechanism that we begin to repeal regulations that don't make any sense. And if I found out that my bureaucrats were making law, how long do you think they'd be there doing that? Okay, they wouldn't be doing that, because I'm the governor and I got a legislature. So the idea that unelected bureaucrats can do all this is a really, it's a bad idea. Secondly, what we really need to do is, I got to get a lot more programs back to where you live. I mean, why run all this stuff out of Washington? Education ought to be run in South Carolina. Medicaid ought to be run. Transportation. Hey, I'll give you another example. Senators here have been struggling like crazy to figure out a transportation bill. Do you have that done yet, Senator? What are you here for? You better be back there getting this done. But here's what I'm proposing. You think about this. Right now in this state, you go and you fill up your car and a truck, whatever, and you pay a gas tax. You then collect that money and you send it to Washington. They then, in the committees, take that money and do with it what they want, and then they send less back. So why not just not send it there to begin with? Okay, and then what we could do is we need to maintain the interstate. So put a couple pennies down there in the till, let them maintain the interstate, and then you can keep whatever you graze here, you keep. And then you can pave your roads to whatever you want. You can have whatever priorities you want. It shouldn't be, somebody in Washington trying to decide what should be happening in South Carolina. Now, we've actually voted on this several times, and I guess we're getting a little bit closer to passing it. But I feel very strongly about the ability of states to manage their own infrastructure. You know, for example, I believe in tolling, okay? I don't know how you all feel about it, but if you use something, pay for it. You don't have to toll everything, but some things you can toll. Right now, you can't toll a road that has federal money in it unless you go out and build another lane. Isn't that right, Senator? I mean, it's just, I mean, what kind of deal is that? And then the federal government decides to do things like Amtrak. You know, they've got, I don't know if you know this, if you've ever been on an Amtrak train, but they have a restaurant on there, and the restaurant can't even make money. And it's not like you can get off, you know? So, and they offered me, by the way, a high-speed train. This is really great. It was going to go from like Columbus to Cleveland, maybe to Cincinnati. High speed. It was going to go 39 miles an hour. I could run faster than the train. So better than sending our money down there to have people do what they want with it, just keep it here. And I think, Senator, the whole country would be better under this. And if there's some states that need a little extra help, we'll throw another penny in. That's where we ought to be going on this. This is the 21st century, by the way. But, you know, the fact is that these regulations are killing small businesses. Secondly, I think there ought to be, when we do a regulation, there ought to be a sense that the benefit outweighs the cost. We don't do that either. I mean, it's just all screwed up, isn't it? So we got to have big change. Now, let me explain something to you. People can talk about big change. I've delivered big change. I know how to get these things done. It's one thing to talk about them. Senator, am I right? It's another thing to do them. And the things I talk about are not designed to get me, you know, they're not an election document, they are a governing document. And so I think these things I talk about today are things that I hope you would understand. These are the kind of things I would do, like, right off the bat.
Thank you, Governor. Just a moment ago, I mentioned one of the executive overreaches on immigration. I might add that 27 states, including South Carolina, challenged that at the district and the appellate level, have won at both levels, and now we're going to possibly the top level. But that begs the next question on immigration. You know, what would you do to solve or to address the illegal immigration problem in the United States?
Well, the first thing we have to do is secure the border, obviously. I mean, I don't know anybody that doesn't think that that's the case, because we don't want people just walking into our country. Frankly, you know, we now have to take a look at our entire visa program in light of what's been happening. But here, you know, physically, the border needs to be secured. And then I think we need to have a guest worker program where people can come in and go out legally with an employer who needs their services. And then for the 11, 12 million that came here, broke the law to get here, if they haven't broken any other laws, I'd have them pay some penalties, some fines, do some things, and I would allow them to have a path to legalization, not citizenship. I mean, the idea that we're going to deport 11 million people is ridiculous. It's not going to happen. I mean, you can all think, some of you may think it's going to happen. It ain't going to happen. So let's try to figure out how to, one, secure the border, make sure you have a legitimate guest worker program. Let's hire employers. Let's make sure we hold employers responsible for violating what the law is. And let's make sure that anybody that comes across, once the border is secured, goes back. No arguments, no lawyers, no discussion, just go back. Come in legally. And then I think that's something that could literally pass the Congress. And I think the public, when everything settles down, I think they think that was fine. I was there when Ronald Reagan tried to deal with this issue in 1986, and the problem was we didn't secure the border. So that needs to be done, and then I think we can get this resolved.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next area, which is federalism and the 10th Amendment.
You want me to talk about executive orders, by the way, because some of this, or is that coming later?
Well, yeah.
I mean, sure, as an executive, I like executive orders, okay, so, and I like executive power. But let me tell you that I do some executive orders. But the one thing you don't want to do, unless you absolutely have to with an executive order, is you want to make sure you're talking to the legislature. So we got some state reps and obviously senator here. If I was going to move on an executive order, I'd kind of tell them, what do you think? I'd want to check it out, because what I don't want to do is to enrage the people who I'm going to need to work with to get other things done. And I think what the president did on these executive orders is he didn't even make an effort to talk to the legislative leaders. He didn't ever call them down to the White House and say, look, here's what I'm going to do if you don't do something and we sit down and work something out. That's kind of how it works. Now that may be boring in a presidential campaign, but that's how it works, folks. And in my state, we've gone from a loss of 350,000 jobs to a gain of almost 400,000, from a deficit of $8 billion to a $2 billion surplus with a strong credit rating, so I kind of know how to do this. And I have my squabbles with the legislature, but not much, because you have to respect them, and I think what the president did with this was just to roll over everybody, and you just can't do that as an executive. I mean, every once in a while, General, maybe every once in a while you got to say, this is just the way it's going to be, and this is what we're going to do. But you don't want to make that a habit or a practice, because frankly, we're all part of a team to try to lift whatever situation we're in. Whether we're the mayor, whether we're on the city council, whether we're the school board. I mean, people got to work together to get things done and to make sure that we get good outcomes.
All right, thank you, Governor. Good answer. Now we're going to move to federalism and the 10th Amendment. What is the proper role of the federal government as it relates to the states? So when I talk to high school groups, and what I basically tell them is, guys, the Constitution is a handbook. It's a how-to manual that we all buy something at Best Buy for Christmas. You first need to go your direction, right? How to put it together, how to use it, operate with the piece of equipment you purchased. That's what the Constitution is for the United States. Then you have Article 1 that basically says, legislative branch, this is all your powers. This is everything you can and can't do. Article 2 in the manual is executive branch, these are all your powers. This is what you can and cannot do. And then Article 3 is the same with the judiciary. Then if you go to the very back of the Bill of Rights, you have the 10th Amendment, which is, oh, by the way, every power that's not in the handbook and those articles for the three branches of the government, if it's not given to the federal government or prohibited, it is reserved to the states. That is as simple as I can make it for high school students. So, Governor, having talked about the 10th Amendment, how do your interpretations of the 10th Amendment shape your policy and
explain it to me? No, just kidding. I mean, look, my view is that we can talk about the Constitution, okay, on this, but we can also talk about practicality. I don't want to be, completely here off the deep end, but there's not a lot that seems to be working very well in Washington. And why? When a person tries to do everything, generally they don't do anything very well. And what we've seen is an accumulation of power in Washington, and it's just not working. So what we really need to do from a practical point of view, not just from a philosophical point of view, although I agree with the philosophy, which is if it's not something that the feds have to do, the state should be able to do it. But think about it this way. If I move education, K through 12 education, from Washington into the states, then the states get to figure out what works for them. And then here's the beauty of it, is I look at what you're doing, you can look at what I'm doing as the governor of Ohio, or we could look at what's happening in Mississippi or Nevada, wherever, and we can learn from one another. And then what it does is two things. One, it stops this one-size-fits-all mentality. Let me tell you, everybody in this room, whether you're, everybody here I assume is a Republican, but if say you're not, doesn't matter. We know that the welfare system constantly needs to be reformed. But if you want to change the welfare system in fundamental ways, you have to go ask for permission for people in Washington. I don't like that idea. Let me run my program in my state the way I want to run it, based on our situation and our values. Not on the basis of somebody in Washington. They don't even know what time zone Ohio's in. If you call down there from Ohio, they'll say, no, what time is it there? We're in Eastern, by the way, in case you didn't know. So there's a couple things that get achieved. First of all, we get to end the one-size-fits-all mentality. Give you another one, job training. Basically, under the federal government's rules, including Republican Congress, you have to lose your job with the bulk of the money that goes to you before you can train somebody. Why wouldn't we train somebody while they're working so they don't lose their job? So why don't we just put job training right down here in the hands of the legislature? And so what we could do is we would be shifting power out of there, be shifting money out of there, We would begin to fashion solutions based on who we are, which all the states could then study. And then finally, we'd be centering the federal government on what it needs to do, not everything that it's doing now. And then that's consistent with what you have in the 10th Amendment. Now, we tried to do this, you know, back when I was budget chairman, we did some changes. We did loosen some of the strings, but we had a Democrat president, and we couldn't get everything done we want. But I actually believe that welfare and Medicaid and education and job training and infrastructure and probably more need to be sent to the states. And then you go ahead and do it. Now, you got to spend the money on what it is you get the money to do. I mean, you can't take Medicaid money and pave highways, Senator. You know, I'm not saying you would. I'm just saying to you, there has to be, you know, some kind of like guardrails. But frankly, you've got to do a better job of fixing these problems than they are from somewhere out. And that's what the 10th Amendment was all designed to say. And, but you got to have somebody that's going to do it. You got to just do it.
So next I'm going to turn to the EPA. Some of you think that stands for the Environmental Protection Agency. I refer to it as the Eliminate Prosperity Agency because there's an avalanche of regulations coming down on businesses. One particular one that I'm working on right now, anyone heard of WOTUS, the WOTUS regulation, Waters of the U.S.? And basically what that says is they're redefining what is considered a water of the U.S., which is a navigable water that's interstate between the states in nature. Like the Mississippi River would be the most textbook definition. The way they've rewritten the rule, it could be a low-lying area in your backyard of your business or your home, a ditch that is filled with water that is ephemeral in nature and filled with water 2 or 3 months out of the year could now be a navigable water or a waters of the U.S. that you would have to go to the federal government, not state government, the federal government in order to be able to use your land the way you want to.
See, that's where it goes back to what I talked about on regulations before. Number one, anything that is going to cost more than $100 million has to be voted on by the Congress. Number two, you have to have a cost-benefit analysis. In other words, the benefit from the regulation should be more than the cost. That's supposed to be applied, but it is not. Thirdly, I wanted to create in my budget, I wanted to create a people's court. They said that Judge, who's got a people? Judge Wapner has got a people's court. But here's what we're going to do. I'm going to, we do this in Ohio, even with our EPA, I would appoint a bunch of people who are independent to be a place for us to go when bureaucracies are coming up with really bad rules. And you would have a place to go that could join you in your effort to reverse a decision that we would patently know was absurd. First of all, of course, you got to have people that run these things who are not out there to make these decisions that are extreme. And by the way, in my state, my EPA director is loved by small business. Because, you know, we want to make sure we have a good environment. You just don't want to be crazy about this. So I'll give you an example. We have a fracking industry in Ohio. We have very, very tough rules on fracking. We want to know what you're putting in the ground. We want to know if there's a fire on the wellhead. We've got to report it. We do a lot of things like that. But you know what? The companies, they're fine with it. You know why? Because it's simple, it's clear, and if you make a mistake, we're not there to pound you into the ground. I mean, if you have an evil intent, that's one thing. But if you make a mistake, we'll help you. So, I mean, can you imagine that my EPA director is so appreciated by small business? And you can do this. But then the key is, and look, I mean, I've got the whole issue with bureaucracy as well. You salt people throughout your bureaucracies to carry out your purpose. And the purpose is common sense. Don't be saying because you got water in your backyard somehow, you know, you can't walk into your backyard. I mean, that's so ridiculous, right? So we got to get a little common sense, and the common sense is the kind of people you put in, and then you have other opportunities to make sure you get it done. See, frankly, all these federal rules need to be reviewed, and the ones that don't make any sense ought to be gathered up in a bundle, and they ought to be repealed. And secondly, you got to have people inside those bureaucracies who understand what it's all about, and they got to understand that the most important thing for a person to do is to create a job for somebody. And if they're killing jobs, then they're hurting families, communities, states, and the country. So actually, folks, It's a hard thing, but if you can get the right management, if you've got the right leadership from the top, and at the same time, you encourage people who work in these agencies to use common sense and for them to realize that what they do in their job matters. You can do that. You can get people's morale up and to do a better job. So this is a real big issue in this country because the regulatory side, whether it's Dodd Frank on banks or whether it's EPA and excessive regulations, I mean, you're suing the EPA right now. I'm suing it because it's going to shut down a chunk of my economy based on some rule that, I mean, I don't even think they have the authority. This is going to end up, I hope, in the Supreme Court where they're going to be able to rule on excessive regulatory decision-making. But I guess I've had that on my chest for a while.
The bottom line is the need to balance a livable environment with the cost of regulations, not mutually exclusive. Right. We can do both.
Yeah, you can do both. You don't need to say we have to have a, you know, on fracking, for example. You know, it's controversial, right? I mean, people read about it and it's controversial. You know, it's not controversial for me. It's just that you don't come in and you don't do dumb things, and we'll have some guidelines and you follow them, and that's the end of it. And what companies don't want is uncertainty and things that are just excessive, that don't add anything and just are punitive. So in the beginning, I had people that were protesting we're going to have fracking, right? People are like, oh no, we have these protesters out here. I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take these moms who have kids who graduated from college who are living in their attic, who could get a job in the energy industry, and I'm going to have the moms have a talking to the protesters. That'll be the end of that. And the fact of the matter is we've got an industry that is growing. It's not the end of everything here, but it's fine, and if we keep managing it the right way, we'll have great success on this.
Okay, I'm going to move quickly now because I want to try to give a few minutes to the folks out here that came to see you. ObamaCare, been challenged twice by the states. I was in both of those lawsuits, 5 to 4 votes. We're not going to litigate why the Supreme Court was wrong, but what would you do to work? What would you do? Would you work to repeal Obamacare, and if so, what would you replace it with?
Well, first of all, of course we would get rid of it because it's imposed higher costs, first of all, on insurance because of all the mandates. So the mandates are everyone's for that. The Republican Party cannot, you know why we have Obamacare? Because Republicans had the majority for a long time and they didn't do anything about people who had pre-existing conditions and people who couldn't get health insurance. I mean, that's not it. I mean, what, are you going to have somebody go bankrupt because they got a condition that they can't get insured for? I mean, that's just wrong. So we should have been working aggressively to have a program in place that was market-driven. So the first thing I would do is to get rid of a lot of those mandates. That would drive the cost of insurance down. We need to make it affordable. Secondly, I would take some of the federal resources and block grant them down here in South Carolina, and I would combine it with Medicaid so that the working poor would be able to have some form of health insurance. And so that's what I would do initially. But longer term, we have a bigger issue. The issue is we practice medicine that rewards quantity. If the general, God forbid, had to go to the hospital tonight and he needed 2 tests, Senator, how many do you think he'd be given?
12.
12, somebody said. You know, if you go to the hospital and you need a CAT scan to give you an MRI. You know why? Because no one cares. No one's connected to this. So the costs keep going up. And I believe there's a better way to do this. I believe that we could use a market system to reward people for keeping us healthy or getting us healthy once we're sick. And that is a whole change in the way we think of healthcare. Our primary care physician ought to get money in his or her pocket for keeping us healthy. And there are ways to get this done. We are driving this nationally out of Ohio. And let me just give you an example. There is an agreement between the Children's Hospital in Columbus and the insurance company. One of the biggest reasons why, probably the biggest reasons why children end up in the hospital is for asthma. So it used to be if you had asthma, they stick you in the hospital. Now I had a daughter that had RSV as a baby. She needed to be in the hospital. But what they found is a big chunk of people who were being put in the hospital don't have to go into the hospital. They can be treated on an outpatient basis. So if they're treated that way, that means the hospital loses money, right? They don't have as many visits. The insurance company, they got more profits because they're not paying claims. So guess what happened? The hospital and the insurance company is sharing the fact that the kid was not put in the hospital. Sharing. So we need to know how our hospitals do. We need to know how our physicians do. We need to make sure that the patient is in the middle of all this, and we need to use a market-driven system to change the whole way in which we think about medicine. You don't know what your doctor makes. You don't know if your doctor's any good, do you? I mean, if I were to ask, how many in here have a great doctor, you'd all raise your hand. If I were to say, how many of you in here have a great hospital, how's your hospital doing, you wouldn't know. Because transparency doesn't exist. And the ability to shop as a consumer is really critical. And the ability of the health plans to drive more efficient but yet high quality health care doesn't exist right now. It's starting to, but it doesn't really exist. Here's what the problem is, folks. My dad carried mail on his back. His father was a coal miner, and my mother's mother couldn't speak English. You know what happens when people start rationing health care? Who do you think gets rationed? You think the guy who's the CEO gets the ration? Or is it the mailman who gets the rationing? So we have to confront this issue. We have to slow down the cost of health care while keeping the quality high so we all can benefit. Now, you know, I have to go in debate stages where I get to talk for 6 minutes about how to fix the healthcare system, okay? I mean, total that, and how we can secure world peace. But that's why these forums are important, because then you get to hear extensively how people are going to deal with these things. Finally, as a governor, I can't blame somebody else. Oh, you know, I didn't get this done because Obama was president. Or I have to lead. I have to have a result, just like Nikki Haley. You got to show what you did. You get a report card. And then when you're an executive, you got to face reality. And that's why we have to think very seriously about whether we want somebody who has not been an executive, who we can judge based on what they've done, because that's the best way to figure out what they might do to lead our country. That's it.
Dodd Frank is where I want to go next. So, like ObamaCare, Dodd Frank is a bill that's over 2,000 pages long. Like ObamaCare, Dodd Frank is a law that has tens of thousands of pages of regulations to implement it. Like ObamaCare, Dodd Frank centralizes control of an entire industry in Washington, D.C. by unelected bureaucrats who rule through administrative fiat. So Dodd Frank has enshrined too big to fail on Wall Street while making capital harder to get on Main Street. That is one of the issues with Dodd Frank. What would you propose we do with Dodd Frank, and what would you recommend in the free market in regulating the financial industry, if at all?
Well, I think that the financial industry does have regulations. I mean, we don't want to have no regulations in the financial industry, but the problem with Dodd Frank is it's gone so strong that your community banks and your regional banks are getting crushed, and what we're going to end up with is them selling. You know that. Maybe you don't know that. I'm sure you don't. If you're a small business person, you kind of know it, because there's so many rules and restrictions on you. First of all, you're having a hard time dealing with the burden of reporting. But secondly, it's so difficult to make loans today. And if you're a small business, if you can't get a loan from your local bank, who do you think you're going to get it from? I mean, not that there wouldn't be big banks that would loan, but that's not what works really efficiently. In terms of the big banks, if they're going to take risks, they got to reserve their own money to take those risks. That's what I think they should do, so that we don't have to bail them out. So based on the risk, they ought to be the ones to have to set aside their own assets in order to cover that risk. So we don't want to have no regulations, but we don't want to have regulations that are going to wipe out the small banks, and this whole thing either needs to, when you say repeal, that sounds good, everybody, but I don't know the practicality of that, but the practicality is there to skinny all this down and make sure that our small banks are not going to be crushed. Because when they can't deal with it, they sell to a big bank. I mean, that's what happens. And then you don't have your little bank. I got the Delaware County Bank. I called them yesterday. I said, you need to stop payment on a check. Somebody, the check is lost. They don't make me come in and say, okay, Laura's there, you know, Laura knows me, you know, how's it going, John? We read about you in the paper. Why don't you come into the bank once in a while? I mean, we have a relationship, and that's what you want with your local community, right? I mean, I have this pharmacy, it's called the Uptown, I call it the Uptight Pharmacy, and I go there, and I pay a little bit more, but I want the community. I want them to deliver something to my house if I'm not there. So we don't want to be stomping out these little folks because Congress got carried away and did something too extreme.
And I've spoken to bankers who told me that they used to give, these are community bankers who used to give character loans to a guy they grew up playing basketball with, who's a farmer, and now they're terrified of giving a character loan, and that farmer can't go to the big bank and get the loan anymore. So it's made it very difficult for small town businesses and bankers to lend money to
small business is it. I mean, in our state now, no small business will pay income tax. Small businesses are the ones that create jobs.
Yeah.
It's pretty good, isn't that, Senator? Yeah. No payment on income tax for small business, because they pay on the individual level, and we just don't do that. We also killed the death tax, by the way, so a small business can turn their business over to their kids without having to visit the undertaker and the tax guy on the same day. And now that we've killed the death tax, we're working on killing death. We haven't made a lot of progress.
Well, that's really good. And one banker, I'll close with this.
One banker, we're killing death. That's a good thing if we could get there.
Well, a banker once told me, he says, for every dollar I have to spend on regulatory compliance, meaning of hiring another lawyer or a regulation compliance officer, that's 10 less dollars I can give to a home as a home loan, or 10 less dollars to a small business loan, or 10 less dollars to a student loan. And he says there's a lot of dollars we're having to spend on regulatory compliance. We obviously want to be regulated, but we don't want to be strangulated. So, moving on. So I'm not going to qualify the question, I'm just going to say the topic in order to try to get to you guys. Second Amendment. This is a Second Amendment state. I think we have a lot of gun owners. My brothers. Okay, good. Anybody want to ask me anything on the Second Amendment? We'll move forward. National Labor Relations Board. You know, this is a very pro right to work state. Very first month I was in office, I heard of the NLRB. They tried to prevent a small startup airplane company from moving to North Charleston. You might have heard of them, Boeing. What kind of people would you like to see the National Labor Relations Board? What role do you think?
You can't have bias, you know, people that are, you know, tilting everything one way. You got to have balance. That's what you got to do. You can't have a, you know, politicized board like that. That's just not. It's completely inappropriate. And I've read about some of the fights that you've had down here, and it's none of their business. I don't think. Not the. I mean, it shouldn't be a partisan, left-leaning, or it should be something that's balanced. I don't know, really, I'm not an expert in the NLRB, but I get the sense it's become very, very political, and I don't like that.
The next area I'd like to touch on is religious liberty. I've talked to people around South Carolina, around the country, and everyone recognizes the Supreme Court's ruling on Obergefell, the same-sex marriage case, and people obviously don't want to discriminate or treat their fellow citizens any differently, but people are also concerned that religious liberty, the right to practice your convictions, could be infringed upon by the government. Do you believe that there's a balance to protecting the new right of same-sex marriage with the rights of people to run their businesses, whether it's a cake baker or a wedding planner, the way that they want? Is there a balance?
Well, look, I mean, the only thing I can tell you is if you're in the commerce business and you're making cupcakes, just make cupcakes. Okay, that's kind of my feeling. I'm for the traditional definition of marriage that the court has ruled, and in my opinion, we move on from that. Now, I will tell you that nobody has the right to impose these kinds of things on our religious institutions. You know, I belong to a church, and our minister is not going to perform gay weddings. We're just not going to do it, and we shouldn't have to. But I've been to a gay wedding, by the way. A friend of mine got married in a secular ceremony, and my wife asked my wife if she was going to go. She said yes, and so I went with her. It was fine. And so I think these are really tough issues. But my sense is you've got to be very careful not to impose this on our religious institutions. That's where you absolutely draw the line.
Would you defend the tax exempt status of churches who want to practice their faith a certain way?
No.
Okay.
No. Why would we do that? We have to protect their ability to perform what they perform, like my church. I
Meaning-
belong to an Anglican church. We're not going to be performing gay weddings. We're just not.
Would you-
If they try to take away our tax exempt state, that's not going to happen. If I'm president, there's no way that's going to happen. So don't worry about it.
Well, I'm asking these questions because these are hot button topics, and I feel like they deserve to be asked. Last question, then we'll go to, I know we're getting to the end, but I just recently sent a letter to the President of the United States on the closing of Gitmo and the transferring of
We're not
the
going to
detainees.
forget that. I
Okay.
don't know if that's, are they going to do that?
South Carolina is one of the 3 states that has been mentioned in Charleston.
No, I'm not for doing that.
That's good to know because I agree with you. All right, I'm going to go ahead.